In the quiet dawn of ancient China, among misty mountains and rice fields painted gold by the rising sun, a legend was being born. It wasn't forged in royal palaces or mighty battles, but in the heart of a young girl named Hua Mulan, whose bravery would echo through the centuries. Our story begins during the Northern Wei dynasty, around the 5th century, a time when China was fractured by war, its people weary from endless conflict. When the emperor decreed that one man from each family must join the army to fight the invading Ruran nomads, fear and uncertainty gripped countless homes. For Mulan's family, this was more than just a distant command. It was a death sentence. Her father, an aging former warrior, was too frail to survive another battle. Her younger brother was just a child. And so Mulan, young, determined, and fiercely devoted, made an unthinkable decision. She would go in her father's place. But in a world where women were forbidden to serve in the military, this was not an act of simple courage. It was a rebellion against an empire's tradition. Disguising herself as a man, Mulan cut her long hair, bound her chest, and dressed in her father's armor. Under the cover of night, she left her village, her home, and her name behind. For 12 years, according to legend, Mulan fought alongside fellow soldiers, marching through mountains, crossing frozen rivers, and charging into the heart of battle. She trained like them, she bled like them, and though she had to guard her secret every waking hour, she earned their respect not as a woman pretending to be a warrior, but as a warrior who could outride, outfight, and outthink most of the men by her side. It wasn't just her strength that made her stand out. Mulan was known for her leadership, her sharp mind, and her unwavering loyalty. In one account, when her commander was injured during a siege, Mulan took command of the troops. Through cunning strategy and relentless determination, she led them to victory. Even high-ranking generals began to take notice of this mysterious soldier who seemed to rise like a storm on the battlefield, ferocious, fearless, and utterly unstoppable. But living a lie comes at a cost. Mulan couldn't allow herself to form close friendships or relax for even a moment. A slip of the tongue, a wrong gesture, or even a shared bath could reveal the truth. She endured not only the brutality of war, but the loneliness of secrecy. The strain was immense. Still, she pressed on, because for Mulan, it wasn't just about survival. It was about honor. It was about protecting the people she loved. Eventually, after years of tireless service and countless victories, the war came to an end. The emperor, grateful for her service, offered Mulan riches, titles, and high-ranking military positions. But all she wanted was to return home. Not as a hero, not as a general, but as the daughter she had once been. When Mulan finally removed her armor and revealed her identity to her fellow soldiers, the reaction was not one of betrayal or outrage, but of awe. The same men who had fought beside her, who had watched her face death without flinching, now realized that the warrior who had stood shoulder to shoulder with them all those years had done so while carrying a secret that would have ended her life had it been discovered. She had not just defied an empire, she had redefined what it meant to be a warrior. Back in her village, Mulan was welcomed not with judgment but with pride. Her story spread across the land, passed from mother to daughter, father to son. She became a symbol not only of courage, but of transformation. A reminder that greatness does not come from gender, class, or power, but from the choices we make when no one is watching. Centuries later, her legend was immortalized in poems like The Ballad of Mulan, inspiring emperors, revolutionaries, and even modern filmmakers. But at its core, Mulan's story is not one of fantasy. It is the deeply human tale of a girl who loved her family so fiercely that she was willing to risk everything for them. And that is where we'll continue next. Because some believe that behind the poem and legend, there was a real woman, a real war, and a real legacy that the history books have tried to bury. Do you want to hear what may have truly happened?
As word of Zatoichi's skill spread across the provinces, legends began to take shape around his name. No longer was he merely a blind masseur wandering from village to village. He was now known as the Silent Storm, a man whose cane hid not just a sword, but a code of honor sharper than its steel. And yet, despite his growing fame, Zatoichi remained humble, choosing simplicity over glory, discipline over praise. But fame, as it often does, brings attention from those who seek to test it or destroy it. One cold autumn morning, Zatoichi arrived in a town nestled at the edge of the mountains. The town was known for its silk, but recently traders had stopped coming. The streets were too quiet, and the few townspeople who passed him spoke in whispers. He could feel the fear hanging in the air like smoke. At the local inn, the owner hesitated before offering him a room, finally whispering that the town was under the control of a local gang known as the Iron Claws. They had taken over everything: the markets, the roads, even the shrine. No one dared resist. Zatoichi listened quietly, fingers running over the polished wood of his cane. That night he sat near the hearth, his ears tuned to every sound. He heard the drunken laughter outside, the uneven steps of men used to violence, the frightened breathing of a girl hiding in the next room. And he knew, as he had so many times before, that justice would not come unless someone delivered it. The next morning he walked calmly into the market square. The gang members, clad in dark robes and wielding curved swords, laughed at the sight of a blind man tapping his way through the stalls. They mocked him, calling him a beggar, tossing coins at his feet. One of them pushed him roughly, and Zatoichi stumbled, seemingly harmless. But as the man turned to leave, a sharp whistle cut through the air. In a blur, the cane unsheathed, the sword gleamed, and the man fell without a sound. The crowd froze. No one had even seen Zatoichi move. That was the beginning. Over the next few days, Zatoichi dismantled the Iron Claws one by one. He did not seek them out, he simply waited. When they came to him, filled with arrogance and weapons drawn, he answered not with words but with action. His movements were effortless, like wind through grass. He did not kill for revenge. He struck only when needed, each swing of his blade purposeful, each step guided not by sight but by intuition sharpened over a lifetime. But the leader of the Iron Claws was no fool. His name was Daisuke, a former samurai turned mercenary known for his cruelty and cunning. When he learned of the blind swordsman dismantling his hold, he became obsessed. He offered a bounty, summoned old allies, and began spreading rumors to draw Zatoichi out. And then he did something even worse. He took hostages, children from the village school, locked away in a barn, guarded day and night. Zatoichi could not ignore this. At dusk, under a sky streaked with blood-orange clouds, Zatoichi approached the barn alone. He had already mapped the area in his mind, listened to the guards' patterns, measured the space between each heartbeat. When the attack came, it was silent, like a shadow sweeping across stone. Within minutes, the guards were unconscious or disarmed. The children emerged unharmed, running into the arms of waiting villagers. The final battle between Zatoichi and Daisuke took place on the wooden bridge just outside town. Rain had begun to fall, each drop echoing on the planks like drums. Daisuke stood tall, his katana drawn, sneering at the man he could not believe was blind. But Zatoichi said nothing. He simply removed the blade from his cane, pointed it downward, and waited. Their duel lasted only seconds. Daisuke charged with all the fury of a man who had built his life on fear. Zatoichi stepped aside gently, almost lazily, and his sword moved once, twice. Daisuke collapsed, stunned, unable to comprehend how he had lost before he had even begun to fight. Zatoichi sheathed his blade, turned, and walked away, the rain washing the bridge clean behind him. The townspeople wanted to celebrate him. They offered him gold, a place to stay, even statues in his honor. But Zatoichi declined. He did not fight for praise. He did not seek reward. He simply nodded, tapped his cane against the road, and continued on his way. Each village, each battle, each silent act of justice, these were his true legacy. He did not need history books to remember him. He left behind something far more enduring, the reminder that strength does not lie in sight but in spirit, that justice does not always come from courts and rulers, but sometimes from quiet wanderers with a sword hidden in a cane. And so Zatoichi disappeared into the mist once more, just as he had arrived, leaving only silence and stories behind. In the years following his confrontation with the Yakuza bosses of Edo, Zatoichi's name spread like wildfire across Japan. Tales of the blind swordsman who walked with a masseur's cane and wielded a blade faster than lightning had become something of folklore. Yet Zatoichi himself remained humble, continuing to wander from town to town, avoiding fame, searching instead for peace and justice wherever it was absent. But peace was elusive. Word reached Zatoichi of a remote mountain village in the province of Kai, where people were vanishing without explanation. Farmers left for the fields and never returned. Children spoke in hushed voices of the shadow in the trees. Bandits had always been a threat, but this felt different. The villagers were gripped with fear. And so, Zatoichi, sensing something dark at play, made his way through the forested hills. his cane tapping gently with every step. Upon arriving, he found a town haunted by silence. No laughter in the streets, no music in the inns. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow. He was greeted not with warmth but suspicion. Who was this blind stranger arriving in a time of dread? But Zatoichi, as always, needed no welcome. He checked into the smallest inn and listened. At night, the forest spoke. Subtle sounds that only someone like Zatoichi could hear. Rustling where no animal should walk, breathing behind the wind, footsteps masked by fog. That night he ventured into the woods. Alone, what he found chilled even him. A hidden encampment deep among the trees. Not mere bandits, but a militia of ex-samurai turned mercenaries. Hardened killers who had been preying on helpless villages, kidnapping the able-bodied and forcing them into labor or slavery. Their leader? A ronin known as Jubei, once a loyal retainer to a shogun, now a bitter outlaw with a hatred for the weak. Zatoichi returned to the village with news of the camp. At first, no one believed him. A blind man had found what dozens of able warriors had failed to uncover, but an old woman stood and said, "I have heard of him." The swordsman with eyes in his ears, and just like that, they listened. He didn't rally them to war, that wasn't his way. But when the mercenaries came for their next victims, Zatoichi was ready. The confrontation was swift and violent. In the fog-filled forest, Zatoichi struck with precision and grace. His blade sang through the trees, each stroke guided by instinct and sound. One by one, the mercenaries fell, unable to match a man who did not rely on sight but something deeper. Jubei himself confronted Zatoichi near the river's edge, taunting him. "You're blind," he sneered. "How do you even know where to strike?" Zatoichi answered softly, "Because you never learned how to be silent." Their duel was brief. Jubei, with his rage, charged wildly. Zatoichi stood calmly listening. Then came one cut, clean. With the mercenaries defeated, the village began to breathe again. Children laughed. Farmers returned to the fields. The wind carried music once more. But Zatoichi didn't stay. At dawn, he packed his things, nodded to the villagers who now watched him with reverence, and walked into the hills. For him, the journey never ended. Wherever there was fear, corruption, or cruelty, Zatoichi would appear, sometimes only for a night, sometimes for weeks, but always when he was needed most. And as he vanished into the morning mist, a boy asked his grandfather, "Was he a samurai?" The old man smiled. "No, he's something rarer. He's a good man."
The winter that followed was harsh. Snow blanketed the roads, and most travelers sought shelter behind walls and fire. But Zatoichi, wrapped in his modest cloak, continued walking. He had no destination, only direction. Toward the whisper of injustice, the scent of fear, the silence of those too afraid to speak. His path took him to the port town of Iwanaga, where the sea winds carried the cries of the desperate. The fishing boats had stopped sailing. The harbor was locked in fear. The townspeople were under the grip of a corrupt official named Magistrate Gandi, who imposed unbearable taxes and seized anyone who dared to resist. What made it worse was that Gandi didn't work alone. He was protected by a private militia of Ronin warriors, men who had once served noble houses but now sold their blades for gold. They patrolled the streets like wolves, dragging shopkeepers from their stalls, storming homes at night, and keeping order through terror. Zatoichi arrived unnoticed. At first glance, just another wanderer. Just another blind man seeking food and a place to sleep. But the locals noticed something strange. The way he moved through the narrow, icy streets, graceful yet cautious. The way he always turned his head just before a footstep behind him. The way children, who feared everyone, somehow smiled when he passed. He found lodging in a small tea house run by a widow named Hana. She had once been married to a samurai who was executed for refusing to serve Gandi. Now, she kept her head low and her voice quieter. But when she served Zatoichi his tea, their hands touched, and she froze. Something in him felt different, like steel under silk. That night, a fisherman was dragged from his home. His wife and son cried for help, but no one dared intervene. No one, except the blind man in the corner of the inn, who slowly stood, finished his tea, and stepped into the snow. 3 guards faced him outside. They laughed. "You lost, blind man?" Zatoichi tilted his head. "Yes, but I found something else." His cane slid open with a whisper, and then silence fell. 3 bodies in the snow, untouched by footprints except his own. By dawn, the town buzzed with rumors. The ghost swordsman had returned. Ganda doubled the patrols. He brought in more ronin. He even issued a bounty, dead or alive. But fear does not guide Zatoichi, only justice. In the coming nights, one by one, the oppressors fell. Not by fire or battle, but by precision. Zatoichi struck in alleyways, on rooftops, in the dead of night. He never killed in anger, only in balance. Each act a correction of wrong, each swing of his sword, a whisper of morality. The people began to stir. Whispers became hope. Men who once stayed silent now spoke out. Hana, once hidden in grief, became the voice of a rising resistance. She offered shelter, food, and courage, all inspired by the blind man who never asked for anything but a bowl of rice and quiet. The final confrontation came under the full moon. Magistrate Ganda, feeling cornered, gathered every blade he could find. His estate became a fortress. His men, numbering nearly 30, waited behind walls and archers. Zatoichi came alone. They laughed at first. One blind man, but as the night passed, the laughter died. One by one, guards vanished from the walls. Arrows fell into the dark but found no target. Sounds came from every side, footsteps slicing wind, a cane tapping in rhythm. When Zatoichi reached Ganda's chambers, the magistrate was alone, trembling. You don't know what you're doing. I am the law here. Zatoichi approached slowly. The law? Then you should have listened to the people. The final cut was not angry. It was peaceful, as if finishing a song. By morning, the town awoke to a different world. The gates of Ganda's estate were open. The sun rose over quiet streets. And Zatoichi, as always, was gone. Only his footprints in the snow remained, melting with the dawn. He had left behind more than justice. He had left behind courage. Spring came quietly. The cherry blossoms bloomed across the countryside, soft petals dancing in the breeze, settling on rooftops and rivers alike. For many it was a season of renewal. For Zatoichi, it was simply another road, another town, another injustice waiting to be revealed. He walked without aim, letting the rhythm of the earth guide him. His cane tapped gently against the ground, his ears catching every shift in wind, every breath in the trees. His reputation, though, always arrived before him. Whispers of the blind swordsman who fought like a ghost and vanished like smoke had spread far and wide. This time, the road led him to a mountain village called Katsura, nestled between cliffs and pine forests. The village looked peaceful at first glance, but peace is sometimes just silence before a storm. The silence here was heavy, too heavy. The first sign was the temple bell. It had not rung in months. The second was the faces, downcast, wary, the sparkle of hope replaced by a dull, cautious fear. Children no longer played in the streets. Merchants kept their stalls half open, and at night no light dared flicker through paper walls. The reason? A group called the Black Crest. They were not samurai, nor ronin. They were former soldiers turned mercenaries, led by a man named Kagami Ratsudo, a strategist without honor and a killer without conscience. The Black Crest had taken over the mountain pass, demanding tribute from every village nearby. Refuse, and someone disappeared. Speak out, and your house burned in the night. Zatoichi arrived quietly, as he always did. At the tea house, the old innkeeper looked at him with unease. "We don't want trouble," he muttered. "We've learned to keep our heads down." "You should too," Zatoichi simply smiled. "Then I'll keep mine low, just a bowl of miso and some silence." But trouble never asked permission. That evening, a young woman ran into the square, screaming. Her brother, taken by the Black Crest for refusing to pay. The villagers turned away, eyes on the ground. Lips sealed, no one moved. Except the blind man. Zatoichi stood, dusted off his cloak, and said quietly, "Which way did they go?" They begged him not to follow. They said the Black Crest were too many, too brutal, too ruthless. Zatoichi only nodded. "Good, then I won't hold back." He found the hideout at the base of the mountain, a crumbling fortress turned into a den of thieves. Guards patrolled the outer walls. Drunken laughter echoed from within. None of them noticed the figure standing calmly in the shadows, listening. He waited until moonlight fell on the compound. And then the wind changed. One by one, the guards were silenced. Not with rage, with precision. Zatoichi moved like a shadow through the corridors, his sword barely leaving a sound, only the soft thud of falling bodies. The prisoners were found shackled in the cellar, bruised and bleeding, but alive. He led them out quietly, through the back pass. "Go home," he said. "Light candles tonight. No more hiding." But Ratsudo wasn't there. He was in the village. He had expected retaliation. What he didn't expect was Zatoichi's speed. By the time Ratsudo raised his sword, Zatoichi was already in front of him. Their blades met in a flurry of motion, iron against air, power against instinct. Ratsudo was a master strategist, known for reading his opponents. But Zatoichi, he didn't telegraph his movements, he didn't hesitate. His sword danced from rhythm, not thought. "You fight well," Ratsudo growled. "You talk too much," Zatoichi replied. With a final cut, the battle ended. Clean, swift. Zatoichi stood still, listening to the petals fall. By dawn, the villagers emerged from their homes. This time they looked up. They lit lanterns. They spoke names of the lost and sang songs of the free. The temple bell rang for the first time in months. But Zatoichi was already gone. He never stayed for the applause. He never waited for thanks. His reward was in the silence that followed, the kind of silence that meant peace, not fear. As he walked once more down the winding road, a child called out behind him, "Who was he?" The old innkeeper answered, "Some say he's cursed. Others say he's a ghost. But I think he's something else. A man who sees more clearly than any of us." The wind carried the scent of the sea. Zatoichi walked slowly along a rugged coastal path, the waves crashing far below against jagged rocks. His cane tapped against the uneven stones, but his step was steady. He had been walking for days, guided not by direction but by a feeling. A pull in the air, a sound in the silence. Something wasn't right ahead. Soon he reached the fishing village of Kimura. It was a place where time stood still. Wooden boats bobbed in the bay. Children ran barefoot through the narrow alleys. Fishermen mended their nets under the sun. On the surface it looked peaceful, too peaceful. But Zatoichi heard the difference. The laughter was hollow, the nets were half empty, and the smell of salt was mixed with something heavier, the scent of fear. The villagers avoided his presence. Their glances were short, their conversations even shorter. At the small steakhouse, an old man finally whispered the truth between gulps of rice wine. "They came 3 months ago, called themselves the Red Wave, said they'd protect us from pirates. At first they did. But then they became worse than the pirates ever were." Zatoichi tilted his head. "Who leads them?" The old man hesitated. "A woman. They call her Lady Oyu. She wears crimson robes and carries a blade curved like the moon. They say she was once a court noble. Now she's a killer with a fleet behind her." Zatoichi stayed silent. That night, as the village fell asleep beneath the stars, a single bell rang in the distance. The warning bell. The Red Wave had returned. 6 boats drifted into the harbor, their sails marked with crimson serpents. From them stepped a dozen armed men and a tall woman cloaked in red silk, her hair tied in silver thread. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "And cold. I want double," she declared. "The catch, the coin, and your obedience." No one moved. No one dared resist, except for one blind man who stood up from his table and calmly finished his tea. Lady Oyu raised a brow. "And who are you supposed to be? Another traveling fool?" Zatoichi didn't answer. Instead, he turned his ear to the wind. "There are 11 of you. 12, if you count the man still hiding on the back boat with a crossbow." Her eyes narrowed. Within seconds, everything changed. One of the Red Wave soldiers rushed forward with a spear. Zatoichi stepped aside and dropped him with a clean, flat strike. The others followed, but the swordsman moved like a whisper. His blade gleamed once, twice, then disappeared again into the cane. By the time the dust settled, only Lady Oyu remained standing, her own blade drawn. "You're good," she hissed. Zatoichi nodded slowly. "I'm not the best, just the most patient." Their duel began. It was different from the others. Oyu was fast, deceptively so. Her blade curved and snapped like lightning. The villagers watched from their homes, barely daring to breathe as steel clashed under the moonlight. They fought across the docks, over barrels, through shallow water. But Oyu made one mistake. She laughed. Zatoichi never laughed when he fought. He listened. He heard her breath shift, her stance change, the water around her foot ripple in anticipation. He moved first, a sudden cut, sharp, clean. Final Oyu dropped her blade, falling to her knees in the surf. "You could have killed me," she whispered. Zatoichi turned his head slightly. "I only kill when silence demands it." He left her alive, but the Red Wave was broken. Without their leader's strength, the others fled into the night. By dawn, the village was free. The fishermen came out of hiding. The children laughed for real this time, and the sea at last sounded calm. Zatoichi walked along the edge of the beach, his footsteps soft in the sand. The old man from the sake house caught up to him. "You saved us." "No, Zatoichi replied. I only reminded you that fear can be defeated. And where will you go now? Zatoichi smiled faintly. Where the road gets quieter. And with that, he disappeared once again into the horizon, guided only by the wind, the whispers of injustice, and the sound of a world in need. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in a steady rhythm, drumming on rooftops, splashing in puddles, and soaking the earth until the narrow roads turned to thick, clinging mud. But even in the downpour, Zatoichi moved as if the skies were clear. His cane struck the path with the same confidence as always. To him, rain only softened the sounds he needed to hear more carefully. He was heading toward a town called Kurohana, a place whispered about in every village, but never with joy. Kurohana was cursed, they said, a place where the dead walked and the living vanished. Merchants refused to pass through it, and travelers took long detours to avoid it. But Zatoichi didn't believe in curses. He believed in cruelty, and cruelty always had a human hand behind it. By the time he reached the town's entrance, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. Kurohana looked half-abandoned, shutters closed, smoke rising from only a few chimneys, and a silence that pressed against the chest like a heavy stone. He stopped at a tea house. There was only one patron inside, an old woman with sunken eyes and trembling fingers. She didn't speak. The innkeeper, a nervous man with a crooked smile, poured Zatoichi a cup without being asked. You're brave to come here, the man muttered. Or foolish. I've been both, Zatoichi replied calmly. The man leaned closer. They come at night, dressed in white, their faces covered. Always 3 of them. They take someone and vanish before sunrise. No one dares follow. Zatoichi sipped his tea. And who are they? The innkeeper lowered his voice. They call themselves the White Blades. No one knows who they are, but rumor says they serve a lord who's been dead for 20 years. They kill in his name. They say he never accepted defeat. Zatoichi listened, unmoved. That night he stayed in the tea house, seated by the window, waiting. At midnight he heard it, a door creaking open 2 streets away. The sudden sob of a woman, and 3 footsteps, light, deliberate, synchronized. He followed the sound through the narrow alleys, past silent homes, until he reached the town shrine. There, under the flickering lanterns, stood 3 figures dressed in white, their faces masked with bone-white cloth. In their hands, slender curved blades that gleamed even in the darkness. Zatoichi approached calmly. You don't walk like ghosts, he said. The figures turned slowly, silent. You breathe, you sweat, and your blades are real. Still, they said nothing. Zatoichi tilted his head. You steal people in the name of a dead man. Why? One of them stepped forward, blade raised. The fight was instant. The White Blades were fast, trained killers with perfect coordination. They moved as one, surrounding Zatoichi in a deadly triangle, but the blind swordsman didn't need to see them. He felt the pressure of their feet in the earth, the rhythm of their breath, the pause before each strike. He moved like water, flowed through their pattern, turned their unity against them. One by one they fell. The last one gasped, his mask torn halfway. You don't understand, we're trying to restore him. Lord Tsukahara, he's still... Zatoichi stopped him with a single word. Gone. He left the shrine with the girl they had tried to take. She was shaking, barely able to speak. But he said nothing. Sometimes silence healed better than words. By morning, the town began to breathe again. People opened shutters. Smoke rose from stoves. Children peeked out at the empty shrine and whispered that the curse was broken. The innkeeper met Zatoichi as he prepared to leave. You stopped them. How? Zatoichi paused, then said quietly, I didn't fight ghosts. I fought men too afraid to let go of the past. And where will you go now? Wherever the road remembers its silence. As he walked into the misty morning, the rain began again, light, soft, almost like a blessing. Behind him, the cursed town of Kurohana started to live again. The journey was long and the road had changed. It twisted now through higher mountains where the wind howled like wolves and the trees whispered secrets of the old world. There were fewer villages here, fewer voices, only the sound of footsteps, the tap of a cane, and the steady beat of a heart that had walked too far for too long. Zatoichi was growing tired, not in body, but in soul. Years of wandering, fighting, healing, and punishing had taken their toll. He no longer needed to ask where he was going. The road always answered for him. And this time, it was guiding him to a place he thought he had buried long ago, the village of Tashiro. It lay nestled between hills, forgotten by time. This was where it had all begun. Where Zatoichi had first tasted peace, first touched blood, first learned to listen instead of look. The villagers were older now. Some remembered him, most only whispered. "He walks like smoke," said one. "He's come to finish what never ended," said another. The truth was simpler. He had come to say goodbye. There was one man in Tashiro who had waited for years. Master Kanbei, Zatoichi's old teacher, now nearly blind himself, though his mind remained sharp as ever. They met beneath the old cherry tree where the petals fell like memories, slow and quiet. "You've come home," Kanbei said. "I don't know what that word means anymore," Zatoichi replied. The old man smiled. "Then sit. We'll figure it out together." For days, Zatoichi remained in the village. No blades were drawn, no men hunted him. He helped fix roofs, fetched water from the spring, and sat with children who asked him how he could see in the dark. He told them stories of forests filled with silence, of men who wore masks to hide their weakness, of women who taught him kindness, of enemies who bled like brothers. He never mentioned the number of lives he had taken. But sometimes, when the firelight hit his face just right, you could see it in his eyes, the weight of it all. On the 7th day, news came. A group of mercenaries, calling themselves the Black Wind, were tearing through villages to the east. Killing farmers, burning fields. The government wouldn't help. They said the mountains were outside their concern. The villagers turned to Zatoichi. He listened to them, every word, every fear. Then, in the middle of the night, he packed his things. Kanbei met him at the edge of the road. "You've done enough," the old man said. Zatoichi shook his head. "Justice doesn't end when I stop walking." Kanbei handed him something wrapped in cloth, a new sword forged by the blacksmith of Tashiro. "Then take this, you've earned it." Zatoichi bowed deeply. The battle was swift. The Black Wind never expected him. They had heard stories, myths really, of a blind swordsman who fought like a ghost. But stories do no justice to truth. By the time the sun rose, the forest was silent again. Not a single villager had died. Zatoichi returned with a single cut on his hand. The villagers tried to cheer him, to celebrate, but he slipped away before they could gather. He walked back to the cherry tree where Kanbei waited. "I think this is my last road," Zatoichi said quietly. Kanbei nodded. "Then rest. The world will keep spinning, but for once it doesn't need you to chase it." And for the first time in many years, Zatoichi stayed. He built a small house on the hill above Tashiro, where the wind was soft and the stars could be heard at night. He taught children how to listen, truly listen. He taught young men that strength was not in the sword, but in restraint. And when he grew old, the villagers carried him when he could no longer walk. No monument marks Zatoichi's grave. But every spring, when the cherry trees bloom, petals fall across the path where he once walked. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the tap of his cane, guiding the wind, guiding the story. For though his eyes never saw the world as others did, he saw deeper than most ever could. And in the silence he left behind, the legend of Zatoichi only grew, not as a killer, not even as a hero, but as a man who walked in darkness and still chose the light.